Chapter 1. Montclair. The old brass knocker on the paneled front door needed polishing, Kara thought, glancing at it as she swept the wind-blown leaves off the wide veranda. She made a face. One more thing to do before the family began to arrive for Aunt Garnet's party. Another reminder of how she'd neglected keeping Montclair to its old level of perfection. But they never used the front entrance anymore. Hardly ever had what you'd call company. Recently, they had all been so busy. Kip at the airfield as an instructor, she giving riding lessons, trying to keep up the stables with little help and less money. With Aunt Garnet's visit, she now had to get busy, get things in order, especially since she had volunteered to host the birthday party at Montclair. Kara shook her head ruefully. Another one of those reckless impulses that had got her into trouble most of her life. But Garnet had come here as the bride of Bryce Montrose, her first husband, and it somehow seemed appropriate to have the party here. Thank goodness Kitty would be here to help. Of course, Kitty would notice every single thing that needed doing. Kitty was as opposite Kara as a twin sister could be. With a final swoop of the broom, Kara went inside. Looking around herself and seeing the house through her sister's eyes, Kara realized that it badly needed a great deal of attention. When she had first come here after marrying Kip in Paris 5 years ago, she had had the best of intentions. She remembered the dismay and discouragement she felt when she had opened the door of Montclair. But she shouldn't have been surprised. Kip and Luke had lived here alone after Mattie, their longtime housekeeper, retired. The house had become a repository of museum-quality pieces alongside wicker sets that needed both repairing and repainting. Fan-backed Victorian chairs with curved legs and shredded velvet upholstery were set opposite worn leather Morris recliners. Priceless mahogany Duncan Fife tables bore white circles where glasses had been carelessly placed. Fine portraits hung slightly askew, their elaborate gold frames covered with dust. Kara had had her work cut out for her. Not that keeping a perfect house or entertaining was something she had wanted to spend the rest of her life doing. But some semblance of order had to be made of that chaos to be able to have a home where children could live and grow up in some sort of normal fashion. She had been sure there would be children besides Nicole, the little French orphan she had brought back to Virginia, and Luke, Kip's son by his first marriage. Kara had wanted a whole houseful of little Montroses running about. However, there hadn't been the slightest sign that this dream would be fulfilled, and by now Kara had given up hope. After all, she was nearly 40. She had started to wonder if they should think of adoption. Well, that decision was for a less hectic day. First things first. Kara made a slow walk through the downstairs, but her mind couldn't seem to stay in one place. She kept thinking of Paris and how it had been for them. Lost in thoughts of the past, she did not hear the back door open or Kip's footsteps. He had left his boots outside and was in his stocking feet. He came up behind where she was standing, encircled her waist, and kissed her cheek. Startled, she twisted around and pushed him a little away, saying, "You scared me, sneaking up on me like that." "I live here," he said in mock protest. "Can't I walk into my own house, kiss my own wife?" Trying to recover her composure, she asked, "Where's Luke?" "With Nicky. They're feeding the ducks," he told her and released her. "You'd better shower and change," she said. "I'm not sure when Kitty will get here." Kip started toward the stairway and then turned back. "Oh, by the way, Bo and Tim are coming for supper." Kara bit back the words she had almost flung at him. Why didn't you let me know? It was, after all, Kip's home. He could invite whomever he wanted here. She just wished... Then she remembered she had put in a roast earlier. Having dinner guests just meant cutting up more vegetables, potatoes. Bo Charters and Tim Pratney were fellow flyers, friends of long standing. Tim had been with Kip in the Lafayette Esquadrille. the squad of American volunteers who had flown for France in the war. The two of them had been among the very few survivors of that group. They shared memories, a love of flying, a friendship that was bonded in steel, a camaraderie that would last a lifetime. "That's okay, isn't it?" Kip asked. "Sure," Kara said over her shoulder as she headed for the kitchen. She took some potatoes to the sink and began scrubbing them, her mind still occupied with Aunt Garnet's coming visit. For as long as she could remember, the old lady had caused ripples. Garnet had never gotten over being the prettiest belle in Mayfield, a pampered daughter and wife used to having her own way. She still liked to have her own way, even if it meant manipulating other people's lives. Poor Brienne. She was probably in for it this time. Kitty Traherne took the turn off the highway, drove through Main Street, then onto the familiar country road. Her neck felt tight and her back ached. The drive from Williamsburg was long and depressing. So much of what had been quaint and picturesque about the countryside seemed to have vanished. Of course, Rockefeller money was restoring Williamsburg to its colonial beginnings, or so it was rumored. But Mayfield looked dreary, its buildings drab, run down. The Depression had taken its toll, and there was no northern multimillionaire interested in a small, out-of-the-way rural Virginia town of no particular significance. It was late afternoon when Kitty started up the winding road that led to Montclair. Halfway up, she drew to a stop. A turn to the right would take her to Eden Cottage. So many memories of Richard and their life together there swept over her. Memories she did not feel strong enough to face. Someday, perhaps, she could go back there to live. But not yet. The last few weeks spent traveling, speaking, signing Richard's poetry books, relating to people almost constantly, had been exhausting. Now, with Aunt Garnet's arrival, there was the family reunion to face. What Kitty really wanted, really needed, was time to herself, time to think, to pray, to plan. Where did she go from here? With a sigh, she turned on the ignition, shifted, and drove the rest of the way up to the house. There, she braked and got out of the car just as the front door opened and Kara came running down the steps, calling, "Kitty! Oh, wonderful! I was beginning to wonder, but here you are. Come in. Welcome back to Montclair." "There's so much to talk about, so much to catch up on," Kara said, curling up at the bottom of the bed in the room Kitty would be using while she was here. "Did you know Aunt Garnet has arrived?" "Yes, I thought she was here. I had dinner with her at her hotel in New York before she left for Richmond." She paused. "You heard about Everlee, didn't you?" "Now, what about our dear cousin?" Kara asked sarcastically. Everlee Bondurant had never been one of her favorite relatives. "She's married," Kitty told her, "to a Russian count." "You're kidding!" exclaimed Kara, astonished, sitting up straight. "No, it's true. Aunt Garnet can fill you in on the details. She attended the wedding." "Where?" "In Paris. You knew that Aunt Drew and Everlee were over there. They'd been to visit Lenora and Lalage, then went on to France. And that's where the romance happened." "Ah, Paris." Kara affected a dreamy expression. "But really, a count? That sounds like something Everlee would do." "An impoverished count, I'm afraid. One of the many white Russian emigres that fled when the Bolshevik Revolution took place." Kara shook her head. Then our luxury-loving cousin won't be living in a palace after all." "More like a garret, I suspect. They're all refugees, lucky to get out with their lives." Just then a knock came at the door. "Tante, I want to see Aunt Kitty," came a child's voice. The sisters exchanged glances. "Nicky and probably Luke, too," Kara said, then raised her voice. "Okay, come on in." The door opened, and in rushed a little girl, small-boned with dark curly hair and huge sparkling brown eyes. She flung herself into the arms Kitty held out to her. A tall boy followed more slowly and stood waiting for the enthusiastic hugs and greetings between his aunt and adopted sister to be over. Then he stepped up and thrust out his hand to Kitty. Over his head, Kitty's eyes met Kara's amused ones. Luke, at 12, was giving notice that he was too old for sissy stuff like kisses. "Oh, I almost forgot," Kara said. "Some friends of Kip's will be here for dinner." "Had I better change?" Kitty asked. "Heavens, no!" Kara got up and moved to the bedroom door. "They're just some of his flying buddies. Practically family," she flung over her shoulder as she went out of the room, not waiting for Kitty's reaction to this additional information. Kara knew how Kitty felt about Kip's continuing interest in flying. She called it his protracted daredevil ace obsession, something he should have gotten over by this time. Kara just hoped her twin wouldn't let her own distaste for any reminder of the war spoil what could be a pleasant evening.